Most of the time, I really don't want to do whatever it is God gives me to do. And then after I do it, I know that it was the very best thing for me. I didn't want to be a teacher, but now teaching is one of the greatest joys of my life. And I also knew that God knew that I was not the right kind of person to send to the mission field. And so I knew He'd never send me to the mission field. I like to camp out at the Holiday Inn and have steak and baked potatoes. And so He wasn't going to send me to the mission field. And one day, a man from Jamaica, a great big tall black man named Vincent Graham, who was a friend of mine, said, "Joanie, I want you to come to Jamaica and teach the children in a tent for 2 weeks." And I said, "No, Vincent, I've got all kinds of kids at the church and the school to teach here. I don't need to go to Jamaica." And I turned him down. So the second year he came back again and he asked me again. And again I said, "There's no need for me to go to Jamaica. I've got plenty of kids to teach." Well, the third time he came back, it was February. It was cold, Christmas was over, the leaves were off the trees, and I thought about beaches and palm trees, and I thought, maybe I could give God 2 weeks in Jamaica in February. So I went to Jamaica. Now, when I landed, Vincent was there in a car to get me, but he said, "You need to rent a car too because you need your own car." Well, I got in the car and it dawned on me that in Jamaica, the steering wheel is on the wrong side and you have to drive on the wrong side of the road. Well, my goodness, I started to holler and say, "Vincent, I can't do this." And he's already pulled away from the curb and headed out. And it's time already. We're late for the night meeting in the tent. Well, I knew I had to do it. I was sweating great drops of sweat and not perspiring like women are supposed to do. I was sweating. And there were carts and goats and people in the road, and I nearly hit the curb 2 or 3 times, and I thought I was going to kill somebody before I ever got to the meeting. Well, I finally arrived at the tent, and I had on a lovely yellow linen dress that's now soaked in perspiration. And the tent meeting has already begun. And before I could go in and sit down, I knew that I was in the wrong spot because there was garbage burning on the street corners. There were pigs and goats and animals wandering around going to the bathroom. It smelled terrible. But I went in and sat down in the tent, and I was prepared to listen to the evangelist who was already preaching. But there was a prime minister doing a re-election campaign right across the street on the corner. And he had a microphone just like the evangelist did. And the Jamaicans wanted to give even time. So they would sit and listen to the preacher for a little bit. And then someone would get up and they'd go across the street and listen to the prime minister. And they'd come back and it was bedlam. Now, my theory is you've got to sit up straight, put your hands in your lap, look straight at me, and behave. And I could hardly stand this. Well, there was a little girl sitting in front of me, and she had a baby in her lap. And the baby began to cry. And she began to bounce the baby. And so instead of just going, wah, it was going, eh, 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 eh. And I thought, well, I can do something about that. So I reached over and picked up the baby and set it down on my lovely yellow linen dress. And it wasn't long before I felt something warm. And I realized that Jamaican babies don't always wear diapers. And about that time, this mother came from the side of the tent, and I guess she thought I was going to kidnap her baby. She grabbed the baby and went and left me with a round, yellow, wet ring on the front of my lovely yellow linen dress. And about that time, I smelled something that I didn't think should be in church. And I turned around and looked behind me, and there were a group of young men behind me, and they had a big brown bottle. It's full of booze. And so I reached around and grabbed the brown bottle, took it away from them, leaned out the tent, and poured it all out on the ground. Now I have a different smell on my hands than I have in the middle of my lovely yellow linen dress. Well, when the meeting was finally over and I went to my little, quote, motel, I thought I would be relieved. But I walked in, and I promise you, there was not a clean place in that little hotel room except the sheets on the bed. And the spread was over that. The jalousie windows were open and leaves had blown in on the bedspread, but I knew that underneath it were clean sheets. Dust on the floor. A silverfish ran across the wall. A lizard came in, and he had one of these necks that swelled up like red. And the next day I asked the gardener, "Is that lizard that swells up red poisonous?" And he said, "Deadly poison, madam." Well, then I asked the hotel manager, and he said, "Oh, no, they won't hurt anybody." So I didn't know which to believe. But I'm thinking, I've got to have a bath, a shower. Now, how am I going to do it and keep clean? But I thought I really had a lot of ingenuity. I got up on the spread of the bed, took off my clothes, left my socks on, paddled across the dirty floor, went into the little tiny bathroom, sat down on the lid of the toilet, took my socks off, swung my feet into the shower, took my shower. Now all I have to do is do the same thing backwards. Sit down on the seat of the lid of the toilet, put the socks on, paddle across the dirty floor, sit down on the bedspread, take off my dirty socks and put on my clean pajamas, and then remove the bedspread, and I have a clean place to sleep. Well, I got up in the middle of that bed on my knees, and I said, God, you've made a terrible mistake, and so have I. There's no way that I can function in this situation, and I want to go home tomorrow. Well, Vincent came to have breakfast with me the next day, and I told him, I said, Vincent, I'm sorry. I can't function. I can't stand the dirt, can't stand the smells, can't stand the disruptions and the confusion. I want to go home. This is not the place for me. And Vincent said, well, Joanie, you haven't done your job yet. You came to teach the children in the afternoon in the tent. And when you teach the children, you're going to be in total control. Now, I'll tell you what. You go this afternoon and teach the kids. And if you still want to go home the next day, I'll put you on a plane the next day and send you home. Well, that sounded reasonable. And so I said, okay, I'll try it once. Well, I got to the tent. Now, the tent was supposed to be in a park. There wasn't a blade of grass in that park. There wasn't a tree. There wasn't a swing set. There was nothing but dirt and a fence around it and this tent sitting in the middle. And I had a little platform on the tent, and so I got up in front of the kids, and I had about 200 kids sitting on wooden benches in the tent. And because it's an English-speaking country, we sang songs in English, and I taught them scripture verses, and I told them a story. And do you know what happened in the middle of all of that? Somehow, God shut my nose to the smells, and He closed my eyes to the filth, and He opened up my heart to the needs of the people. And I didn't go home. I stayed. And not only did I stay, but I've been back to Jamaica many, many times to teach the children and the adults. On one occasion, I was teaching the children in the tent, and all of a sudden, a group of young men on motorcycles came riding into the park, and they began to round and round and round the tent. Now, there's no way I can teach with that going on. That's an impossibility. And so I watched and I waited. And as they came around and got around, coming around behind me, I jumped off of the stage, planted my legs apart, and said, stop! And thank God they stopped. And I said, you fellas either get out of here with your motorcycles or get off of them and sit back there in the back and listen to me tell the story. Well, do you know what? They got off their motorcycles and they came in and sat down. They still had their helmets on. And I said, and take those helmets off. You're in church. And they did it. Well, they not only stayed for that story, but they were back the next afternoon to hear the next one. And they had somebody new with them. And when he came in, he still had his helmet on. And I saw one of the boys punch him and say, take your helmet off, you're in church. And he did. Those young men came back every day for the rest of the 2 weeks to listen to those stories. Now, was God taking care of me? Absolutely. He intended for me to do this. And do you know what? That began a completely different adventure for me because I got to go all over the world in many, many different countries, many times in the same country to teach people because I had learned that God can make you adapt to the situation that He puts you in. So don't turn Him down when He asks you to do something. He'll help you get it done.